So today let's talk a little bit about the transition from the Model T to the Model A, and it was definitely a hard transition for Ford to make. Henry Ford launched his legendary Model T in 1908. And the thing that was really unusual about the Model T at the time was the fact that here was a vehicle that was as streamlined as it possibly could be and available to the average person. Henry Ford literally put a Model T in almost every garage in the United States. He basically put the United States on wheels. The problem came when the Model T ran for such an excessive amount of time. During the nearly 19-year run of the Model T, very few improvements were actually made to the vehicle, other than the fact that manufacturing the vehicle made it more cheaper and thus easier for the common man to afford. By the early 20s, the car was incredibly outdated as compared to the cars that were being released by Ford's competitors. The other big issue was that Ford had kind of reached market saturation and actually started a program to buy back junker cars in order to try and encourage people to start buying Model Ts again. And although the program did a lot to bring sales back to Ford and take a lot of his competitors' used cars off of the road, the big thing is that it just really wasn't enough of a push to really bring back those sales numbers that they had the previous decade. Another major problem that Ford Motor Company was having was the fact that not only were they not bringing in the profit that they were the previous decade, but they were also starting to lose dealers. The dealers were really starting to push back on Ford Motor Company, feeling that they really weren't getting the support from corporate that they deserved. They just couldn't get people into the dealerships to buy a product that was getting to 14 to 20 years old. Some dealerships had even gotten so bad that they started to sell other Ford-related products in order to just try and keep the doors open. Regardless of the fact that Henry Ford felt that the Model T was perfect exactly the way it was, and that a new model wasn't necessary, the numbers at Ford Motor Company spoke otherwise, along with the fact that most of their dealers were speaking rather loudly about the fact that they just weren't making money anymore. It was time for a change, and if the executives didn't push Ford into a change, then Ford Motor Company was going to go under. There was one other thing that also really pushed Ford Motor Company in the direction of coming out with a new line, and that was a major marketing shift that GM had come out with just a few years prior. GM had come up with what is now known as planned obsolescence, which was honestly the bane of the auto industry from that point on, because GM would come out with a new car about every 5 years. But between those 5 years, they would make subtle changes to the car that made the car appealing to people to come back and buy a car before they actually needed one, which was something that previous to what GM was doing had never really been thought of before. The other thing is that they had somebody by the name of Harley Earl. And Harley Earl basically designed and came up with the idea for a prototype car, a piece of literature such as a color brochure, which had not been done before. GM would release color brochures of what was coming next. It was prototypes and concept drawings of what next year was going to be, which was something very new to the public and very provocative to the public that made them want to come in and buy a new Chevrolet every couple of years rather than waiting 4 to 10 years when their Chevrolet was ready to be replaced. And Henry Ford tried for a long time to avoid this. He felt that his Model T was right. He felt that his Model T was perfect the way that it was and that you didn't need to make subtle changes every couple of years in order to woo in customers. If it was already right the first time, why change it? And a lot of their customers felt the same way. But unfortunately, once GM really started showing people the possibility of, hey, we're going to make these awesome new changes. This is something that you're going to want. Basically, they did what Apple is doing now. And it created this cult of, well, I got to have the newest version. And that's something that we've never really gotten away from. And it has caused major problems in the industry. I think one of the best examples of the pressure that was on the industry happened with Nash Kelvinator.
The happy family that owns a Nash Air Flight reaps the benefit of all this. They know they have a wonderful car. A car that's safer, more rigid, more durable. A car that takes them wherever they want to go more economically than any other car.
Nash eventually sold out to Kelvinator, who was a very wealthy refrigerator company. And they tried as hard as they could to release a new line every 5 years to try and compete with the big three, and just couldn't do it. And they were on the brink of just not being able to compete anymore when they decided, hey, let's look and see who we could merge with. And there just happened to be another company at the time that was having the exact same problem, and that was Hudson. So they decided, hey, look, let's get together. Let's try and pool our money. And there was one other company that they approached, and that was Packard. So Packard was supposed to be involved in what would eventually be AMC. And unfortunately, the guy that ran Packard just didn't want to bend on the fact that he wanted to be CEO of the company. And with everything starting with the owner of Kelvinator, he wanted to be CEO. And these two just butted heads. And eventually the guy from Packard decided, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And he backed out. So Hudson and Nash combined, they became AMC. Then they launched the Rambler line, and the Rambler line was hugely successful.
Don't feed a gas hog when you can save and have the fun of driving a Rambler, 6 or V8, at Hudson dealers, at Nash dealers.
Now, at this point, it should be said that the largest advocate for change in Ford Motor Company was Etel Ford. And for a while, Etel had help with the help of the Dodge brothers, which again, Henry Ford pushed out of the company. The idea of Ford Motor Company needing a new car was obviously not a new idea. As early as World War I, Etel and the Dodge brothers actually designed the Model A. And when Ford returned from his peace trip, which was a huge disaster, he came back to the factory and found this prototype of a brand new car that his son and the Dodge brothers had put together. And it said that Ford absolutely flipped his lid, grabbed the nearest tool to him, and had at it at the car. He actually destroyed the prototype, which honestly just really shows how completely horrible he treated his son. I can only imagine how proud Etel was of this particular prototype, and to watch his father completely lose his mind and destroy it had to have been devastating for him. But that didn't stop him from hounding his father for the next couple of years. And by 1924, 1925 or so, it was clear that the numbers Ford could no longer argue about. It should be said that even though Ford was still selling nothing but Model Ts, the sales weren't horrible. They were still competing in the market, but they were definitely way under the other two of the big three. Once the prototype for the Model A was ready, Etel pretty much handled all of the marketing and really wanted to control the narrative that Ford Motor Company was coming out with something completely different and really get people excited about what Ford could possibly be doing next. And he didn't tell a whole bunch in the beginning. He put out a lot of information that's really kind of aimed at Ford has something new on the horizon, and it really worked well. Oddly enough, it worked in the same way change pretty much works for everything. And that is, you had a ton of people who were suddenly very interested in what Ford was going to do next. And then you had a separate group of people that really loved their Model T and were freaking out that Ford was doing something different. And as you run up to about 1926, people started running on the dealerships and actually trying to buy up whatever inventory of Model Ts were left. So afraid that the new thing that was coming was going to be so drastically different than the Model T that they just wouldn't like it. So some people, whether they could really afford it or not, bought more than one Model T, taking one and actually storing it aside so that they wouldn't need a Ford anytime soon. This actually helped Ford's numbers in 1926 and the beginning of 1927. And with the release of the Model A, it was something that was drastically new for the company. And unfortunately, it didn't really hit as well as they were hoping because, unfortunately, the Model A was more expensive than the Model T. I mean, heck, it had a lot more features and there was a lot more involved in setting up the car. This was actually kind of problematic because leading up to the release of the Model A, they had to regularly reinforce that what was coming really wasn't going to be much of a financial difference than what they had previously seen. But unfortunately, with it being an entirely new vehicle with new tooling and a new way to produce it, there was just no way to get the price point to where the Model T had come over that time. There was also one other point that Ford really didn't let anybody know until the time when the car was actually released. And that was, you had to relearn how to drive a car if you were used to a Model T and then went and bought a Model A. You get a chance, there are a number of videos on YouTube that actually show you how to drive a Model T, and it is not the same as driving a Model A. A Model A is much more conventional to what we're used to today. But the Model T had a completely different type of planetary transmission. So it had 3 pedals on the ground, but those pedals didn't do what you think they did. So it is a different method that takes a lot of getting used to go from one of these setups to the other. So Ford had to retrain people how to use the new system, which is good because that was the system that ended up moving forward from there. And again, you can kind of see why a lot of people were hesitant to move from the Model T over to the Model A, especially a lot of people in very rural areas where they are dependent on the Model T and how it works and just kind of afraid of anything new. Sales of the 28 and 29 Model A actually did pretty well, although it really didn't put Ford back at the top of the charts. It definitely brought new interest back into the companies and helped the dealers who were feeling like they just didn't have a product they could sell. So I hope that you enjoyed learning just a little bit more about the history of Ford Motor Company. I will be doing more of these videos moving forward as TikTok is just sort of been a wonderful platform that I started back in 2020, which has just absolutely exploded. But as we don't know where the future is going to take the app, I'm sort of moving over to YouTube and hopefully bringing some of that audience over here. So if you came from TikTok, thank you for liking and subscribing over here. We will be seeing more videos on this channel related to Ford history, and depending on how it goes, I may actually sort of branch out into other makes and models. If there is any particular piece of Ford history that is pre sort of 1955-ish, Let me know what you want to see, and in the comments, I will definitely keep my eye on the comments and try to reply to anything that's said down there. If you get a chance, go and check out the TikTok stuff. Again, I've done thousands of videos over on TikTok and they've done really well. And I'm going to start kind of doing the same format over here on YouTube. And if you're kind of new to this channel anyway, welcome. If you're into anything that is related to Flathead Fords, the Flat Spot is an organization that I started back in 2009 to help people find the information that they need for restoration of their early Fords. We specialize in 1908 to about 1953 flathead-related Fords, Mercurys, and Lincolns. Well, if you're new or you're very experienced with Flathead Fords, you can check us out at myflatheadford.com or definitely go check out our group on Facebook. We have close to 30,000 members that are more than happy to help you answer any technical questions that might come up. Once again, thank you for watching this video. Please go and check out the other videos on this channel, and we will be doing more Ford history moving forward. So I hope to see you on future videos.